Eccolo! Azione.
Welcome to Valley, a world filled to the brim with creatures, big and small, all working together as they share in the prosperity and safety of their communities. The largest settlement in Valley is Three Tree City, a massive dwelling at the conjunction of the forests and the long river,
Inventato in tre.
built across three ancient intertwined trees. It's home to a variety of animal folk and designed to accommodate their different sizes and shapes.
Rotta.
Whether these creatures are most comfortable in water,
È Gaia Cradle 2.0. Cioè l'ha rifatta, nerfata ma sempre forte.
Three Tree City has a place for them to call home.
Rotta, eh? Fortissima
The
la terra
upper
lì,
branches
bimbi.
of Three
Comprare
Tree
subito.
City are filled with a dazzling array of birdfolk, capable of great deeds of chivalry and selflessness. The
Comprare
birdfolk are
immediatamente.
known for their inability
4 per.
to ignore injustice.
No, è leggendaria però. È leggendaria.
Perhaps nothing demonstrates the character of the bird.
3 mana 2-3 volare quando altri allenatore controlli un volare entra. 20++1 sono allenatore controlli senza volare.
A mighty peak that no one but a
Strana.
brave birdfolk can reach.
Grazie Vin per il Prime.
You can recognize a birdfolk who has completed
Comando
the
45 volare quando uno più uccelli controlli infinito del giocatore, scegli uno, metti una creatura uccello dalla mano dal cimitero del campo di battaglia, metti un segnino più su un uccello e controlli e pesca una carta. Merda, però è lenta per tutti i lord. Belle! No, ma di che cazzo stiamo parlando?
And exciting anime art make these cards the apex of collectability. Find English versions globally in collector boosters, and Japanese versions exclusively in Japanese collector boosters. The charming new
Sembrano personaggi che
showcase
esci
wooden frame treatment reads kindred faction cards in frames of foliage,
Basta,
evoking
set
a
preferito.
sense of pastoral beauty
Basta.
and natural elegance. They encapsulate the cozy energy of Bloomborough and allow players to showcase their fondness for these kindred animals and express their own unique personalities. The closest natural allies of the birdfolk are the mousefolk. Plucky, loyal seekers of adventure
3 mana 3-2
glory.
Vigilance Haste. Quando diventa bersaglio di una spell o ability e controlli per la prima volta nel turno, metti il segnino +1. Minchia!
Can't overcome together.
È un comune degli dei.
All the animal folk of Valley cherish their young, and springtime is particularly rich with new life.
I possum.
The new mechanic,
Un mana 1-2 Offspring.
enables you to create 1/1 creature tokens that represent the young version of an animal species.
Comunque era heroic.
The offspring
Valiant
of your
è
animal
heroic,
folk
ma
will
una
have the
volta
same
per turno.
abilities as the parent creature.
Era quello che dicevo
The
io,
only
che avevano
difference
rifatto
is their
l'abilità.
1/1 power and toughness. They are
Stupenda
still
anche
children
questa, cioè
after
fuori di
all.
testa, boh.
These young
4 mana
creatures of
4-4
Valley show
Offspring,
promise
merda. Quando attacchi
and
scegli
are
uno,
eager
crea
to take
un
on the
coniglio 1-1
adventures
tappato
that lie
attaccante,
ahead.
dura attaccante e controlli. Hanno più. Minchia, ma questi
Rabbit
late
folk
game
are
ti fanno
also
un mana
community
sync della
focused,
madonna.
as well as being talented chefs and farmers who provide
Bello,
food to
io non
most
ce
of the
l'avevo,
creatures
ragazzi,
in
è troppo
Valley.
bello. Sono tutte
They're
belli.
conflict
Guardalo!
averse as a rule,
Guardalo quanto è
preferring to let
intrepido questo
trouble blow
coniglio.
over them rather than stick their noses
Grazie
in.
Bruno per il Prime.
That doesn't mean that they can't defend themselves, though. Phineas is one such guardian of the
2 mana
animal
2-2
folk in
Vigilance
Valley.
Reach. Quando attacca metti il
This
segno +1 su ogni
adeptly
altra turno e
trained
controlli che è un
archer
token
stands
o un
ready to protect
boia.
his home from afar, as well as his companions as they
No
venture
dai,
through
ma che
the
cazzo
valley.
state dicendo? Ma cosa sono queste
Gathering
artwork?
together is a surefire path to strength. Bloomborough encourages your creatures to band together so they can gain extra benefits.
Ma questo è l'orda di
These
tutti.
kindred animal folk must share with each other in order to survive. The new mechanic, Gift, allows you to gift your opponent a benefit to reap more value out of a spell or artifact. The gift varies depending on the card. It might be food tokens, an extra card,
Ah, le fai
a
più
1/1
forti.
fish, or something
Ti do un
else.
regalo,
Through their natural
ma
durability,
potenzio la
the
spell. È
strength
un
of their
kicker
kindred
tipo
bonds
che ti do un
and the
token.
willingness to share,
Posso e non posso.
the
Interessante.
animal folk of Valley
Perché non
can
può, cioè
survive
non è
almost
obbligatorio,
anything.
quindi non ci sta.
There
Non
are
obbligatorio è
those in
figo.
Valley that prefer moonlight to sunlight.
Non ce la faccio. Quante
Batfolk
versioni ci
are
sono della
deeply
carta?
protective of their community. Occasionally
Alla fine i
superstitious,
pipistrelli sono quelli che mi
and
garbano meno.
focused on
come
maintaining
flavor.
the
Belli.
balance between all things. Light and darkness.
Oddio no, sto scherzando,
light
sono
and death,
strabelli, sono
and of course,
bellissimi.
Day and night.
No, sono bravissimo.
Nocturnal creatures. They use the moon and stars to determine their choices.
Se hai guadagnato il vita
and
questo
fuel
turno,
their
l'avversario perde
magic.
3 punti vita o scarta una
As a
carta o
result
si
of
rifia un
being
permanente.
awake when others are asleep, they
No, ok, sono
serve
molto
as
belli
silent
come,
guardians
stile.
of the
Gli
vulnerable creatures
scuri.
of Valley. Raccoon folk are free-spirited wanderers, collectors, and entertainers. Moira, trash tactician, wields new mechanic, Expend, rewarding you for spending 4 or more mana in a single turn. This fearsome raccoon also likes to work closely with fellow raccoon folk, adding red or green mana for
Quindi
each
Expend è quanto mana hai speso in questo turno e fai robe.
Rather than settling down in Three Tree City or elsewhere, raccoons spend their lives on the move, acquiring a horde of objects along the way. Some may call it trash, but to a raccoon, every broken teapot and piece of wagon wheel is a treasure. There are even more creatures who thrive in odd and adverse circumstances in Three Tree City.
Veramente la terra c'è in tutte e 4 le versioni. I gecko sono bellissimi.
In equal measure. Lizards also have a spiritual attachment to fire.
Guarda, uno all'inizio della tua seconda main phase, se l'avversario ha perso punti vita, esili le prime 2 carte e puoi giocare una.
Lizard
Bello
communities can often
lui.
be found bundled together around a fire or furnace, sharing this sacred
Questo è un
connection.
missile limited, sì.
The squirrel folk are morbid stewards of land and the life-death cycle. Though they focus mostly on burying the
Sono
remains of the
Golgari,
dead,
gli
a
Squirrel,
select
sono
few squirrel
Warlocks.
folk are able to bring bones
Se
back from
non
the
ce l'ha.
grave
Vabbè,
for their
ridondante
own
dire sempre
purposes.
sono bellissime,
The
ragazzi.
squirrel folk have also become expert at maintaining themselves through caches of food collected through the art of foraging.
Ah, forage è
The new
mangia un
mechanic,
food o esila
forage,
3.
is a squirrel-themed mechanic that allows you to exile 3
Domanda di 2
cards
detta,
from
ci
your
vengono può castare le
graveyard
spell dal
or
cimitero
sacrifice a food
foraggiando in
token
aggiunta.
to gain an effect.
Ma è bricce per le creature!
Rat folk are isolationist keepers of secrets and ancient relics.
Ma raga,
They
lo
survive
scoiattolo
harsh
nero era bricce per le
circumstances by
creature.
forming psychic connections with native insects. With their insect companion by their side,
Aggiungi
rat
esili a
folk
3
can be
per
quite
rigiocare le creature dal
formidable in a
cimitero.
pinch.
Ho capito, ma lo tappi e in quel turno fai breccia. Vuol dire che tutti i turni puoi fare breccia se non te lo levano. Quello è fortissimo. Aspetta un po'. Che cazzo di meccanica forte è Forage? Attenzione.
Beh,
Otter sono maghi. Uscirà un mago forte. Non questo, costa già troppo, però. Figo.
The frog folk are curious and intelligent. They possess a unique culture of augury, which allows them a limited understanding of the future. While their foresight makes them an instrumental part of life in Valley,
Esina un'altra creatura che controlli e rimette in campo battaglia. Ah, blinkano. Strano blink in Simic.
Sometimes the frog folk, acting on their own foresight, can bring
Mano
doom
4 detta, ci può guardare la carta in cima, puoi giocare le terre e castare spell che costano 4 più dalla cima tappa sul Bill 2. Poi
Inviting retaliatory wrath from the
ci comanda se 5 volare travolge le word scarta una carta, le creature e l'avversario hanno
elemental carries night
merda
that blackens the sky. Maha is just one of the many dangers across Valley. These animal folk must coexist.
ci comanda se 6 word serifi on food. Vabbè, quindi è X-proof. Le altre creature sono food artifacts in addizione al suo tipo.
And for naturalists, the borderless field notes treatment.
Queste non mi piacciono, troppo semplici, mi piacciono meno.
Rendered in the wild by a loving
Queste mi
hand.
piacciono meno,
But
oggettivamente.
the people of Three Tree City are not helpless. In addition to the main set's Imagine Courageous Critters cards, Tamiyo is one of 4 that can be found in the Commander decks. Because Bloomburrow has its own unique aesthetic, planeswalkers and creatures who happen to end up here, like Ral, are transformed.
For Bloomburrow, hopefully you've just seen a ton of cool stuff
Adoro.
from
Sì,
the
sì, sì,
upcoming
sì, sì,
set.
sì, bello, bello,
We're
bello,
gonna
bello,
spend the
bello,
next
bello, bello, bello.
hour diving into a lot of what you've just seen, including mechanics, the archetypes, calamity beasts. We're going to see some promos. We're of course going to look at preview cards, but we're going to dive deep into all of that and talk with some of the minds behind this adorable set. We have with us today in the studio Ian Duke and Oliver too, who are, well, I'll just let you introduce yourselves. What was your part in this set?
Hey everyone, I'm Ian Duke. I was the set design lead for Bloomburrow, which means I was responsible from taking the vision handoff all the way through iterating on the card set itself, sculpting the limited format, and seeing the set through playtesting process.
All right, Oliver.
I'm Oliver. I'm a game designer.
Sono Oliver e non vorrei essere qui.
I worked a lot on Bloomburrow during its set design process and worked a lot on the limited and
Sono Oliver, giuro, vorrei essere qualsiasi posto altrove, non qua.
Two of the best people to walk us through this set. So we're going to start going through a bunch of mechanics and preview cards and all of that sort of stuff. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in chat. I'm not going to guarantee we get to them because we've got a lot to get through today. It always helps me if you tag Magic, and I'll keep an eye out for them and ask what I can. But we're going to launch right into it with one of the coolest new mechanics, Ian.
Il nuovo simbolo è pose, le zampette. È una valuta delle carte interna. Praticamente le carte ti danno tot zampette e ne puoi mettere come ti pare. Questo l'abbiamo visto.
War Leader, which is a 4/4 Rabbit Knight with that Offspring ability.
Ragazzi,
and whenever you attack, you either
questo token
or give everything +1/+1. So tell us a bit about this Offspring ability.
Yeah, Offspring is sort of a kicker-like mechanic that appears on creatures, where if you spend a little bit of extra mana, you get an additional copy of that creature, except the copy is a little baby 1/1. And what's super cool about this mechanic, sort of mechanically and gameplay-wise, is that the creatures often self-synergize, meaning if you have the multiple copies of them from using the Offspring mechanic, they kind of combo together in some way. So the War and War Leader
saranno tutti i token delle creature con Offspring, sì.
Its ability here can either make tokens or give your team a boost, or you can kind of mix and match the two over the course of a couple turns.
Ma sto cazzo è fatto con l'IA? No, è disegnato da uno bravo, ma che cazzo dite? Questi sono artwork da Dio, sono spettacolari tutte.
They are copies of the creature, so they inherit the mana value that the base creature has.
Okay, and they're all adorable little ones.
Bella Yoko! Ciao Bove! Ciao Bove, grazie per il terzo mese di Cavaliere della Gleba, anche lei che non mi usa il Prime e quindi è un uomo vero.
Tender Wild Guide.
Giomana 2-2 Offspring, aggiungi mana qualsiasi ora, metti il segnale più uno su questa ratura. What? Di quarto ne faccio 2?
Alright. Next, let's move on to another mechanic that's really nice. It's just, you're just giving people stuff, Oliver. So tell us about Gift and this first card, Kidnap.
Yeah, so Gift is also similar to Kicker, except instead of paying additional mana, you give your opponent, or in multiplayer you get to choose an opponent to receive a gift, and it's often a card.
Grazie sti cazzi, Cavaliere della Gleba per 15. Questo è fotti un pezzo fine, eh. Se peschi uno lo stappo subito, se no lo tengo stappato, ma intanto l'ho preso, è 4 mana remove al secco.
The gift that you're giving kind of is related to that. Card is generally like the most
Che brutti artwork, non tornerà mai il design di una volta. Hai ragione, vatti a fare le seghe su porno vintage e a guardare il bagaglino.
3 turns later. But if you do give the gift, you get a full mind control, but it's not card advantage in the same sense mind control generally is, because you're giving your opponent a card. But you get a big tempo advantage, so it's still a very powerful play.
All right, we have another gift card here to show, which is a simpler version of the gift mechanic.
We're down, distruggi l'artefatto l'incantesimo. Se hai fatto il gift, distruggi 2!
Balance we see between the different kinds of gifts in the set.
Yeah, so I'd say if you're getting like a full card and reward, generally you're giving a card. If you're getting a more minor reward, then you'll get a fish or a food token.
Okay, so yeah, so like we're down here. It's a naturalized effect, but you can destroy 2 if you give a card, like you said. Cool.
Sì, se negano il gift non succede, ragazzi.
Expend. So we've got Wandertail Mentor here.
1, 2, 2.
So Ian, tell us a little bit.
Sì, bellissimo.
Expend is a mechanic associated with the raccoon creature type.
Il turno dopo diventa subito un 3-3 volendo, perché di secondo rampi, di terzo fai 4 mana, usi 4 mana e si gonfia lui. Di secondo diventa 3-3 se fa un drop a 4. Di terzo diventa un 3-3 se fa un drop a 4 subito. Questo è buono. Figa. Bisogna vedere quanto cambia, quanto si abbassa il meta con l'uscita di Kamigawa, ragazzi. Secondo me perde parecchio.
And I see it specifically calls out Expend 4. Are there different mana costs with Expend in the set?
I sort of glossed over that a little bit. There are a few cards that have different Expend costs, but most of them are 4 at lower rarities. And then there's a couple more exciting ones at high rarities that have, I think, Expend 8 is one of the examples.
Well, I think we saw one of those more exciting ones in the debut. So let's look at Muera Trash Tactician. So this one again has that
Expend è il numero di mana che hai speso in questo turno. Quindi compreso lui. Se te fai Muerra e un altro drop a 1, già fai 3 punti vita. Hai già speso 4.
And then we also have shown a couple here. So let's start talking about these. So this is the Borderless Raised anime card. Where and how can people pick these up?
So these are available in collector boosters only, and they're all in the foil raised treatment. There are 20 cards in the set that have this treatment, and you can get them in collector boosters of any language. They'll usually be English language, but the Japanese collectors boosters have the Japanese language versions of them as well.
Cool. All right, and we'll talk more about treatments.
Certo che valgano. Il mana. Sto abbronzato. Il mana speso in un turno.
I will pause and say I'm seeing a lot of questions in chat about bans. We're not going to talk about that today. We're here to focus on Bloomborough. So we'll get to that. Don't worry.
Grull è già un po' che rampa, ragazzi.
So let's go to the next mechanic, Oliver, which is Forage.
Guarda Ruby.
So Forage, we've got Thorn Vault Forager here, appropriate name. It's a 2-mana 2/2, mana dork.
Quanti mana dork?
Add 2 mana in any combination.
E arriva anche la nuova Relfa a fine anno, lo sappiamo. Quanti cazzo di mana dork c'ha il verde in standard?
Oliver, let's focus on Forage. What is Forage?
So Forage is the Black Ring Scroll mechanic.
Grazie mitico del Prime.
Basically, to enable it, you have
benvenuto. Potescativo Telegram tutti nuovi.
So naturally, squirrels are going to be about acquiring food or putting cards in the graveyard. It's fun to combine these two things. Definitely a very black-green feeling ability.
Yep. And we saw a card in the debut as well. So I love Thornveld Forager, but let's bring up Osteomancer Adept here. Oliver, tell us a little bit about this card as well.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a underworld breach for creatures.
È rotto, è rotto, è rotto. Non può rimanere in campo, ragazzi. Non può minimamente rimanere in campo.
And I'd say with this
È
one, it's a
tappo
lot about,
breccia.
You want to acquire food to enable it a lot of the time, because naturally if you use cards from your graveyard, you'll have less creatures to bring back. But black, tends to be better at getting
Non è
cards from the
breccia
graveyard than
perché non lo fai
acquiring food,
subito,
so if you're playing like
ma
a
dal momento che
non-skill,
scende in campo deve essere
that's
rimosso
more about using cards from the
istantaneamente.
graveyard to enable this.
Okay. In the showcase woodland treatment, we've seen a little bit of that so far, Ian. So tell us the story behind that.
So the Showcase Woodland treatment is available in both collector and play boosters, and you can get foil or non-foil versions of the cards. There's 42 different cards in the set, 7 of them are mythics, and the rest are regular rares.
È breccia per pezzi, ovviamente, non è breccia per spells.
The different treatments.
Finally counter e se muore viene esiliato.
Article going up at the conclusion of the show that will have all the details. So if you're in it for the nitty-gritty,
Coltivarci a rapidità, sì. È forte, ragazzi, quello è veramente forte.
All right, now this
Forse è la miglior carta fatta vedere oggi.
Returning mechanic, Oliver, actually we're going to Ian here, which we showed in the debut, which are the enchantment type class.
Domani, quando entra la natura che controlli, infligge danni per la sua forza natura non controlli. Quando attacchi la natura prende +1/+0 e travolgere. Alla fine della tua end step si controlla la natura con 4 turni. Liscia proprio questa, easy, pulita. Il riccio arciere è meraviglioso. Devo ancora vedere un artwork brutta io sto giro.
Tell us a bit about classes, Ian.
Yeah, so this is returning mechanic, as you said. We first saw it in AFR, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and there these were classes, sort of like D&D character classes. You had Ranger and Paladin and Barbarian and things like that. Here we're going for more sort of like pastoral classes, like jobs that you would see in a village, like a fisherman or a hunter or something along those lines.
Okay. What led you to include classes in this set?
It's just a really flavorful way of sort of showing the way that the animals sort of get together and have their own societies and structures and different jobs.
Okay. All right. Next up, we're going to look at, this is one of the coolest cycles in the set, Oliver. It's a mythic set. There's 5 of these, only 5 of these. But these are the seasons. So let's take a look at Season of Loss. And yeah, the card itself, very cool. You can make players sacrifice creatures, draw cards for creatures that die, and then make people lose life. But the paw print thing is a really cool innovation. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I like to think of these as like
Raga, può essere tutte e due sacrifica 5,
depending on how powerful
È sacca 5 questa.
An according amount of currency, so naturally
Sacca 3, pesco 3.
Can't choose multiple times. But there's these are kind of similar to commands from Brothers
Posso
War.
fare sacca 3 e pesco 3?
Big effect cards, but unlike commands, you have
O sacca 2 e poi muori perché ti faccio 20 danni perché c'ho la roba nel cimitero? Questa è fortissima. Questa è una chiusura fuori di testa, oltre bella, vabbè, sono tutte belle, mi sono rotto il cazzo di 3 bello, ragazzi.
Yeah, so you couldn't do the 2 twice and just be like, I'm not going to choose it and save it all.
I'll save 1 point for later. No, that doesn't work that way.
No, okay.
Also on this one, the order matters. Like, since if you choose like 3 ones.
Più che altro ti milli tutto il cimitero, cioè ti milli tutto il mazzo e poi fai la boom, botta.
Now we talk a lot about design knobs when we're talking about this. Seems to have a lot of knobs. How challenging were these to design?
These were really challenging, but we knew early on they were worth it. Just this sort of feeling of you get to mix and match and choose your own combinations, and sort of, these are many cards in one in a sense because they have so much flexibility and so many different ways you can combine. But we did put a lot of effort into making sure that the different modes made sense with each other.
C'è scritto, Matteo, tu hai 5 zampe e le puoi spendere come ti pare.
Okay, let's look at another.
Puoi anche fare sacrifica 1, pesco,
Season of the Bold, so the same, they're all 5 paw prints, right? All the same kind of...
Yeah, I think that is where we ended up. Yeah, we tried mixing different numbers, but 5 is what worked best.
All right, so the single paw print mode on this one is create a tapped treasure
Come sempre
token.
quella rossa è la peggiore, però di queste
exile
cose.
the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play them in
Oddio,
3,
5 mana, 5
until the end of
tesori
your next
volendo.
turn. Whenever you cast a spell, season the bolt deals 2 damage to up to 1 target.
5 mana, 2 tesori e il turno dopo faccio 2 danni per ogni spell che
so this
faccio.
card
No.
is,
Questa è la
a
peggiore.
lot more delayed than the black one, but it enables some really big turns.
In Commander
if
è
you just
buona,
are
però.
able to spend your turn 5 just kind of taking off and setting up. But with the extra mana from treasures, extra cards, and the powerful board wipe ability, you could have some really big pop-off turns the following turn.
Curioso di
Now, I
vedere la
noticed
blu.
that this creates tap treasure tokens, which seems to be something you all are doing a little bit more often. Is that intentional shift?
Yeah, very much so. It's just a little
Curioso di
bit
vedere la blu.
safer in terms of like the explosivity of having a big combo turn and so forth. In this case, you're getting 5 treasure tokens if you spend all of your points on the first mode. So we didn't want you to be able to get like all of your.
Hanno fatto vedere la blu, me la son persa. Il mio cervello non l'ha registrata, forse ero occupato a capire le zampe.
Exactly, yeah.
Da dopo la
It can be a
riguardiamo.
ritual, but it's sort of at least
delayed,
delayed by 1 turn, right? So you're setting up for your next turn.
Very cool. And there are 5 of these. They're all mythic.
Yep.
Yep. And they all get that really cool art.
Sì, l'ho già
Actually,
vista la
let's go
blu, ma
back
non
to
l'ho
that real
letta.
quick, so that you can tell us about the borderless treatment.
Yeah, so these are example of the borderless treatment here. There are a few other cards that also have this. They're available in both foil and non-foil from both collector and play boosters.
All right. There it is. Yeah, the art on these is stunning. This set really just we say this every set, but you know we hit a new level again here. The art is amazing and weird.
Tornare tutti i permanenti non terra in mano. A 5
Dark and
con
all the
3
kind of things. I don't know.
pesco 2 e
I'm
tutti i
really
permanenti non terra in
We're gonna
mano.
see
È
more cool
rotta.
art, coming up with we're going to talk
Rotta.
about archetypes next.
Great.
So
Pesco
next
2 e
up,
rimbalzo
we're gonna
tutta la
go through
board.
All 10 of the archetypes. So Ian,
È
why don't you
invincibile.
first tell us kind of about the
Ah, 6 mana però,
structure
non
of
a
the
5.
set with the
Oddio, 6 è
different
tantino,
creatures and archetypes.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Sei è
first of all, the
tantino.
set has a really strong emphasis on creature types.
No.
And to reflect that, each of the 2 color pairs in limited when you're drafting will be associated with a particular creature type. So for example, in white-blue, we have birds. In red-black, we have lizards, and so on and so forth. We'll go through all of them. But the important thing to know is if you're drafting and you just choose a bunch of creatures of the same creature type, they will have a mechanical identity and your deck will come together in a coherent way. Vice versa, if you pick a color pair and you're doing the mechanical thing there, you'll end up with a lot of creatures of the same type. So it kind of feels like it's in lockstep there in a very cool way.
Cool. All right, so let's start things off with bats. This is the white-black crew. Ian, tell us about
Comune.
what bats are up to.
So first off, all the bats have flying, so you'll see that as a common theme among them. And their sort of mechanical theme is caring about yourself gaining and losing life on your own turn. So you've got a lot of cards that are kind of in the space of a Johnny's Pride mate, rewarding you for gaining life during your own turn. But because they're in both white and black, they also reward you for gaining life during your own turn. So for example, a black card draw spell that costs you some life and gives you some cards, that'll also often trigger some of your triggered abilities from your bats. So this card that we're showing here, the Moonrise Cleric, is just a very simpler enabler for that deck where it just attacks and gains you a life, and then it'll pop off all your triggers as a result.
Okay. Now, we've seen gaining life as an identity for white-black. We've seen losing life as how did you land on it being both for bats?
Just a really interesting way of combining both white and black. You know, bats often, we think of like vampire bats as like sucking blood, right? So it's like...
No, il limited è buona, è un'ottima comune.
So it felt both
Vola, fa
flavorful
vita,
and also
comune,
a really
bicolor.
unique way of combining the different color pies of white and black together.
Yeah. I also want to go back to that comment.
Nessuno è
I
cattivo,
noticed that
solo
we're
le
using
calamità.
hybrid mana symbols here. Can you talk a little bit about that more in the set?
Yeah, we do have a cycle of hybrid mana commons. And they're meant
Le
to
tribe
sort
di
of be a little
Bloomburrow
bit of a
sono
signpost in
tutte
terms of
insieme
teaching you what that
unite
archetype
contro le
is about.
calamità.
But because they're hybrid mana, they can sort of blend into the other archetypes as well. And this is a simple enough one that, you know, any deck might want to use this. For example, like a white-blue deck that's about, you know, birds that also have flying, for example, might want to include this. Just it's a nice card to kind of erase your opponent, gain a little bit of life as you're attacking with an evasive creature.
All right. And we are going to show off all of the hybrid cycle of commons. All right. Let's move over to Oliver and talk about rats with Mind Drill Assailant here.
Soglia!
So Threshold, we saw in the debut, is returning. Talk a little bit about that and how it works with the rats.
Yeah, so rats are all about thresholds. You just want to put cards.
4 mana 5/5 surveil, eh?
Kind of enable itself. There's also like self-mill and looting. Naturally, blue-black likes that kind of stuff. And I'd say the rats also have kind of like a ninja flair about them. They have a lot of like hard-to-block creatures. They're a lot about nickel and diming your opponents rather than just going for a big swing, although this card is certainly capable of that. As you see, it becomes a 5/5 when you have the thresholds.
Well, I think our next preview card talks a little bit more, or shows a little bit more about that nickel and diming here.
2 mana 1/1 non può essere bloccata, infligge danno nel combattimento, pesca una carta.
Helps enable your other thresholds
Liscia.
and itself with the looting, and then eventually
Liscia proprio.
full card advantage, which is what the rats really want.
Sì, sì, fila è forte quello. Il surveil a Bumper è
Next,
fortissimo.
let's move on to one that is
Questa
sure
è
to be a
rotta,
fan favorite, Ian, which is blue-red otters. This might be my favorite.
Questa era rara una volta.
Adorable, but they're also spell slingers. So tell us
No,
about,
non va in Wizards,
this
ragazzi.
otter wizard and the otters in general.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, otters were super popular throughout playtesting.
No, forte in limited questa, cioè, era come era fortissima quella dei Quandrix e aveva lo stesso testo, ragazzi. Quella dei Quandrix aveva lo stesso testo, era fortissima. Quindi sarà forte anche questa, però non c'è un'art brutta, totale. Non va in Wizards, ragazzi, va in Otters, sì, esatto.
And then following them up by removing your opponent's creatures or putting them off balance with bounce spells or stun spells. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is more of a controlling blue-red deck that's focused more on card advantage with a lot of removal spells, and you're trying to prolong the game and then finish your opponent off later on.
Yeah, and here's one of those prowess ones you're talking about. This seems like a powerful little wizard that combines a couple abilities we've not seen in the same place before.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one that, maybe even has some applications for constructed decks as well, just in terms of being able to pop off with a big flurry of spells in one turn and then hit your opponent for a bunch of damage.
All right. Next up, we're going to switch to black-red and some lizards with Cindering Cutthroat, a lizard assassin, which is a heck of a creature type line. But Oliver, tell us what the lizards are up to in this set.
Yeah, they're pretty aggro. They're like a bloodthirst type of archetype, so they're all about getting
Turno 4, Otter Flame of Honor.
A bit of damage to your opponent, so really good with like pinging effects and small unblockable creatures to enable it.
Okay, it seems to me like some of these, we're getting a look at, we're going through the archetypes, and it seems to me like.
Come frega un cazzo di sto certola di merda, rivai all'Otter. Rivai indietro. Non comune! Non comune! Budget, porca puttana.
But their abilities to lose life.
Sconta solo Flame of Honor, non è assolutamente vero.
Are there any color pairs that are more?
Può giocare altre cose, potrebbe tornare Static Discharge con quella, ragazzi.
Of that, and we'll see this a little bit later on, is the Sultai color pairs, blue, black, and green, all care about the graveyard in some way. So we saw the squirrel.
Vaffanculo, Nico. Vaffanculo.
Yep.
Nico, vaffanculo.
From your graveyard to help pay for costs. On the flip side, rats care about.
Bro, che cazzo levo?
That would be an example. And we did put some effort into making sure that there was blending from one archetype to the next, because we didn't want them to be, totally siloed, like the mice are doing one thing and the birds are doing something completely different, because then sort of the draft would just divide up the cards among who's doing which archetype, and you're not competing for the same resources. So we wanted to make sure there was enough blending that you can kind of go your own path and mix and match the creature types in different ways.
All right, well, let's actually talk about the squirrels next. So black-green squirrels is our next archetype. We have Corpse-Berry Cultivator, which is a heck of a card name there. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may forage, and whenever you forage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Talk about this card.
Yeah, so this is telling you just what the squirrels are about doing, which is foraging here. So you can either fill your graveyard and exile cards from your graveyard, or create food and sacrifice food. And this card rewards you for any of your other cards foraging. So it gives you a way to forage, but also whenever any of your other cards ask you to forage, this will get bigger as well. So really kind of ties together all the different things that are going on with the squirrels. And as you're building this deck, you can either choose to lean into the food theme of it, or you can lean into the graveyard theme of it and be more of like a traditional black-green mid-range deck that's maybe recurring creatures from the graveyard.
Forage è un'abilità rotta, ragazzi, attenzione.
And our next card that's sticking with the squirrel archetype is the secret unsung hero of this set, which is Puns. So here is Cash Grab. Ian, tell us a little bit more about Cash Grab here.
Yeah, just a nice little smoothing utility spell to give you some card quality and help fill your graveyard, which you can then use to pay for forge cost and so on.
Now, I do want to stick with this because this set is pretty high in puns. Now, I know you're not in the group that names it, but was that kind of intentional? Did you all have a lot of fun with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just
Sono sconvolto, ragazzi. Io non riesco a non pensare a quel mago.
As many puns as you can, and certainly the vision design team handed off
rapidità, prowess.
Names that had puns in the names. A lot of those changed over time, but in the end, the creative team
passiva di RAL
to capture that fun and flavor.
The next one is not a pun, but let's look at Valley Rot Collar. So, one thing I want to note here, and this was highlighted in the debut,
bello
sort of
lui,
the batching.
Questo mena.
Here. So, can you talk a little bit about the squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats?
Yeah, so this is something we refer to as batched creature typal, meaning that we're combining several creature types together. This is something we came up with during set design because we realized we wanted a strong emphasis on the creature types because, these are lovable.
Questo mena, nel mio leggendario.
People are going to want to be able to build decks around.
Occhio,
But a lot of these creature types are either appearing for the first time in Bloomburrow, or there just aren't very many cards, or there aren't very many strong cards throughout Magic's history.
Grazie.
Types.
Grazie per la conversione da Prime a livello 1. Grazie veramente, davvero. Non c'è mossa più bella che qualcuno possa fare per il canale. Grazie davvero. Che sei diventato veramente il cavaliere della gleba in questo momento. Totale. Sì, questo ti tira il missile di Mazinga a un certo punto. Giochi due in campo, ti fa 16 danni. Fortissimo, fortissimo.
Black blue rats, black green squirrels, and black red lizards. So those are the 4 creature types that appear on the black example here.
Makes sense. And this card in particular looks pretty powerful for a 2-drop.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver can maybe speak more to that, but there's definitely packs a punch here.
Yeah.
That's fairly strong.
And, effectively unblockable, drain damage. Definitely does a lot. Got to make sure to have 2 blockers for this one.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we'll stick with you, Oliver, and we'll talk about mice, which, arguably the most adorable creature type in this set. They are also pretty aggressive, Oliver.
Yep. Mice are about valiant, which is like a heroic-like mechanic or ability word, but has some key differences from heroic. It also triggers off abilities, so works with equipments and targeted activated abilities on other creatures, but it only works once per turn.
Quindi sono effetti forti, ma solo uno a turno.
A bunch of different valiant creatures.
Prince Valiant, Prince Valiant, nel combatte per sua maestà, grande umiltà, sacratesimi e misteri,
What are the mice?
Principe Valiant.
Yeah, I'd say you want to have a good combination of valiant creatures, and I feel like equipment are the most powerful way to enable these because you could just pay the equip cost for each of your valiant creatures and trigger all of them in one turn. But also like combat effects go a long way to enabling these.
All right.
Mi fa vedere quello
Let's
raro.
go back to Ian, and we've already talked a little bit about raccoons, but let's say C Junk Blade Bruiser. And talk about
Cazzato lui, mena 6-6. Ma questo lo scendi di quinto, il turno dopo mena 6-6. Travolgere. È comune. Un artwork che non ha senso, ormai non mi sorprendo più.
On casting spells in a turn, you get a big bonus here, and once again you can do that either by casting just one big spell that costs 4 or more mana, or dividing it up among a few other spells, and it leads to some pretty interesting strategic gameplay. For example, if I have this out already and I play a 2-drop creature before I attack, you might get a little suspicious. Does that mean I have a two cost instant spell in my hand that I'm going to cast during combat? So you can kind of set things up in that way, or you can set up some interesting bluffs.
Puoi fare i trucchetti e puoi expendare 4 instant. Questa è una cosa molto importante. Tutti gli effetti expend sono istantanei se la giochi bene.
We tried it out with working on activated abilities like sacrificing food, for example, but it turned out it was a little bit too easy and a little bit too on board, right? Where you could trick your opponent with sort of like face-up ways to spend a bunch of mana at instant speed. So we ended up going with...
Però ha ragione, se ha giocato lui, il turno dopo gioco un drop a 2 e attacco. Te vuoi parare con 5-5, non lo sai se puoi farlo. Che a 2 mana magari ti faccio flash qualcosa. Crea food flash, morto.
A favorite of many. So here we've got Head of the Homestead. Look at that adorable little bunny crew there. When Head of the Homestead enters, you create 2 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens, which are going to be
questi sono tanti,
on the right there. So Oliver, tell us about the green-white rabbit.
Yeah, rabbits are naturally about going wide. Just want to make a bunch of rabbit tokens.
Ma che Giulia, costa troppo.
Mass pump effect to kill your opponent that way.
Yeah. And we saw a rare version of this in the debut, which is Phineas Ace
Il baghetto Prowess mi ha fatto risaccare. Lui è rotto.
A little bit about Phineas, Oliver.
Yeah, so Phineas is just one of those go wide payoffs.
Lui attacca una volta e ha buffato tutta la board. Ti pesca anche una carta, sei sicuro.
For more backwards compatibility, it also just works with tokens in general. So if you're building a constructed deck, you could just build a normal green-white tokens deck that doesn't necessarily have a lot of rabbits and still use Phineas to good effects.
And that's a commonality among, we actually have a cycle of these legendary creatures at rare, one for each of
Sì, perché tutte le carte con un arco hanno reach. Vero Nelia?
Many of them, we wanted to make them work really well mechanically with what the creature type was doing in the set, but be a little bit more generic, so it's not locked in. For example, Phineas isn't locked into just being a rabbit-only card. Like as Oliver said, it works with just any old token deck.
All right. We're sticking with rabbits for a second to stay on the pun train. Here's Hop to It. Oliver, how does Hop to It fit into the
Ottima.
Punny?
Ottima.
Yeah, so just a easy way to go wide with rabbits. Basically just an army in a can. These kind of cards have had success in the past.
Di solito stava 4 questa in Limited. Me la ricordo, stava 4 in Dominaria, non sbaglio. Era comunque non comune.
Let's move
Tra l'altro
back
tribe
into
che ha senso.
Frogs. Ian, so we got a pretty simple preview card
Giulia.
here, Pond Profit.
Eccola qua.
Have the frog mechanic
Questa
on
è Giulia.
but it's indicative of what frogs are trying to do, correct?
Yeah, frogs are, they're very much about enter the battlefield effects, and that's because the frog mechanics involve sort of blinking and bouncing your frogs from the battlefield into exile, then back onto the battlefield, or back to your hand, so you can cast them again. So it's very much like a value-oriented
problem, ma è Blink
il
tema dei Simic.
Turn after turn.
È Blink.
So as the frog deck builds up its board, it sort of gets to a late game state where it's sort of a value engine type.
Se era un mana, ragazzi, andate a fare in culo.
Cards and getting lots of value in terms of +1/+1 counters and other things like that by using your frogs multiple times.
All right. Someone just noted this in chat, and we.
Ragazzi, il tema delle rane è Blink. Le rane blinkano la roba. Questo è 2 mana 1, è il cane di Kamigawa. È Blink il tema delle rane.
Yeah, this is new with Bloomborough, and it's something we're going to be doing going forward with our templates. We are always thinking about our rules and templates and the words that go on our cards.
Perché saltano?
Streamline that and make that a better experience for our players. So we're very much, trying not to be stuck in the past that, enters the battlefield. What were the old words that we were using for quite a long time, but we realized we can just shorten that, take the words off the card, make it read more naturally, like natural English language, and just kind of simplify things going forward.
Perché saltano? 200 IQ.
Final archetype here, Oliver. Birds. Blue, white birds. We have seed pod squire here. Say that 5 times fast.
Gli uccelli mi stanno sul cazzo, che fa molto ridere come frase. Perché non puoi fare un tema volanti e sinergizza con i non volanti, è una merda.
Birds are definitely pretty weird because all the birds have flying, but they want to work with non-flyers.
I conigli sono tanti perché scopano.
Largely a concession to limited, just because having like 2 between birds and bats of archetypes where all your creatures have flying.
Umbro, hanno nerfato la frase, ora si dice solo enters, che a me torna malissimo.
Birds are more about combining the birds with creatures from the other archetypes to enable the non-flying thresholds.
All right.
And that's also reflective of some of the creative elements of Bloomborough, where the birds are just sort of like helpful creatures that are kind of around helping everybody else out. So it makes sense both.
Sì, ma fai che, ok, magari è stupido, ridicolo, poco pensato, ma fai che il tema degli uccelli è volare, punto. Non farmi volare che sinergizza con non volare, se no io non voglio gli uccelli, voglio gli uccelli.
Another mouse flying, which then makes it evasive, but also triggers its valiant.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And then our next bird card is because I get to pick these, and it's a pun. So it's Strike Force. But this is flying, double strike, vigilance. What are we doing with this card in Limited, Oliver?
It's a strong standalone card. I also like it in the mouse decks because you're going to have combat tricks, so you could pump this up for a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm. Now, how, I mean, obviously you're designing white cards that are white.
Grazie Nicoi per 11 mesi di Prime. E sei incazzato,
In mice decks. How much did you pay attention
A parte l'artwork è incredibile, vabbè, basta dire l'artwork è incredibile, ragazzi.
Cards to make sure that they fit in different archetypes in different ways?
It was definitely something we thought a lot about. You know, we wanted to make sure that the set, as I said earlier, wasn't too siloed and that things blended together a little bit. So in choosing, you know, whether a card was monocolor or hybrid or gold, like a lot of it is how easy it is to cast and how many decks can it go in. So largely we tried to aim the gold cards at being very directional and teaching you what the archetypes are about.
Oliver lì che sta facendo, no, ma a me mi sta tornando la flotta di game.
But they might be, you know, generically useful enough that they can go in a neighboring archetype instead. And then the hybrid ones we tried to make sort of like a little bit instructional as to what that color pair is doing, but also generically useful so that they can slot into other decks. You know, if you're short on playables, you can reach for a hybrid card that was sort of meant for another deck but can slot into yours.
All right. And then here you can see all 10 of the common hybrid cards. Are there other hybrid cards in the set? Are these the only ones?
Allora ragazzi, non fatemi tornare su game perché sennò è finita la mia vita. Ok, grazie Lollo per il Prime. Ti ci vedo ninjato.
A question I wanted to grab from chat, which was about the expend mechanic, and the question was, can you trigger or meet the
Ma sicuramente ancora esiste game, 100%.
You can on your opponent's turn as well. It's obviously a little bit harder, you know, to spend a lot of mana on your opponent's turn, but you can do it. And one other rules thing that comes up often with expend is that you can only meet the certain expend threshold once per turn, regardless of sort of how you divided it up or what order things come into play. It's looking at the whole turn from start to finish, how much mana you've spent up until that point.
Okay. And again, if you want to dive deep into the mechanics, there will be a mechanics article that will go up on dailymtg.com at the conclusion of this stream. All right, Ian, we're going to go back to you to talk about Calamity Beasts. So we saw some in the debut, but let's go over it again. What are Calamity Beasts?
So we've seen lots of small little adorable animals, but as with any magic
C'era stato il periodo di videogame che c'era il boom ed era socialmente accettato, è stato bellissimo, è stata una delle prime cose nerd accettate. Cioè noi si era fuori, si beveva, si chiacchieravano le figlie, si faceva lo scudo, devo andare a casa una mezz'oretta poi torno, perché c'ho il fleet.
The giant blackbird shows up and brings
e te tornavi a casa e la gente non è che ti diceva oh coglione, ma che cazzo dici, sei fuori, ti facevano corri, ti si aspetta, perché capivano. Oppure ci si organizzava tutti gli amici in modo che alla stessa ora ci stava il fleet tutti.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at our preview of a Calamity Beast here. We've got Beza the Bounding Spring. I am going to read this one because there is a lot going on with this 4/5 elemental elk. When it enters, create a treasure token, and if an opponent controls more lands than you, you gain 4 life, and an opponent has more life than you, you get 2 1/1 blue fish creature tokens if an opponent controls more creatures than you, and you draw a card if an opponent has more cards than you. So Ian, what's going on with this?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that most of the Calamity Beasts are destructive, but this is sort of an exception to that rule, being the mono white one of this particular cycle. And this is bringing with it, sort of bringing springtime with it and bringing lots of sort of bounty and benefits reminiscent of cards we've seen in the past, like timely reinforcements. And this is interesting.
Questo è Value, il musical.
Your opponent is outpacing you, and they're ahead of you in a certain aspect of the game that you're catching up a little bit with this ability here.
Very cool. Now we saw one, Oliver, I'm going to go to you for this next one. We saw one in the debut article. That was on the destructive side. So we've got Maad's Feathers Knight here. That's an interesting line with creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1.
Yeah, a lot of interesting things you could do with this card. Combine it with like engineered plague type of cards in Commander and give your opponents a bad time that way. And it's just a solid, hard to kill body by itself that does a lot of damage. And also enables a lot of attacks, like even if your opponent has a 6/6 blocker in play, you could start attacking with your 1/1s and whatnot.
Yeah. And I don't recall, Ian, have we talked about borderless field notes yet? If not, let's cover again where borderless field notes are found.
Yeah, so these are specifically to the Calamity Beast. There's 8 cards in the
festività.
set, 7 mythic, 1 rare. They're all Calamity Beasts, and they can appear. This treatment can appear in both foil and non-foil, in both collector boosters and play boosters.
All right, very cool.
È vero.
Up, Oliver, we're gonna run
È vero, se di 4 fai Night of Souls Betrayal, di quinto fai questo, hai loccato l'avversario delle creature. In historic lo puoi fare.
Through your local game store. So we've seen Hop to It, Shoreline Looter,
Avevo ragione.
Wear Down and Stormcatcher.
Avevo ragione, Sorcery, e purtroppo non è giocabile in standard, secondo me.
Mana, Oliver. That's a new line of text.
Yep, just very exciting catch-all removal spell. I just
Non
like
ce la
how
fa.
clean it is, but it has to be a sorcery, whereas a lot of these variants of these cards are instants, so that's the compensation for just being able to destroy anything.
Yeah. I also have to call out that art.
Raga, infinito meglio che For the Truth.
Cioè,
la differenza tra istantaneo e stregoneria è troppo. In Limited è rotto.
Are not the most splashy cards, but they're very strong.
La Lontra, ragazzi, mi fa
They'll probably
impazzire.
make an impact on a variety of archetypes, even outside of just the Bloomburrow types.
So I did notice, you've got a white card, a blue card, a black card, a green card, a gold card. Do you guys know how you ended up on that instead of grabbing a red card?
È vero, perché è
We're
rosso?
just mostly looking for just appealing cards and sort of the broader aspect of Magic, where even if you're not like super zeroed in on Bloomburrow specifically, that these are useful cards to you. So.
All right, cool.
Shoot the Sheriff e Go for the Truth sono meglio, ragazzi.
Next up, we are going to talk about one of the most fun and exciting aspects of the set, which is the Imagine Courageous Critters. So, these
Con
are
la
cards that are
Otter
reimagined,
potrebbe tornare il peschino di Casmina.
Bloomburrow. Because if you don't know, Bloomburrow has as the plane has this effect where if you come in, you become some kind of animal. Now, some of the Courageous Critters were already animals, but they get Bloomburrowized a little bit, which is really fun. So first, before we talk about these, Ian, tell us a little bit about where you can find Courageous Critters. And,
Con la Otter potrebbe essere un mana pesco 2
Yeah, so this treatment, as you said, they're
eh.
reimagined pre-existing Magic cards, so they're not going to be made standard legal by appearing in these forms. These are just legal in whatever formats they're already legal, but these are cool new versions of them. And they're available in both foil and non-foil, but these ones are only available in collector boosters specifically.
Oliver, è lì che fa?
The one exception
Ho
to
chiuso
that
il gas.
is that Ral is not an
Io c'avevo la pentola sul fuoco.
That's right, yes.
L'ho chiuso il gas.
And as you'll see with our first preview card, they are not all planeswalkers. So the first one, I've already seen chat calling this card forth with several of the squirrel cards.
Pensavo fosse
But this is
Kaya.
Shatterfang Squirrel General. We've got that Imagine Courageous Critters in the middle there, and then it has a borderless raised anime card. And as
Ciao ragazzi, vi piacciono i danari? Ecco a voi i danari.
Right, and then now we've got a pair of reimagined planeswalkers. This one, I love this art. That's all I'm going to say. When we see Nissa, who shakes the world as a frog. Yeah, do you know how the creative team picked what animals these creatures?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
We're going to have to get some people, yeah.
Yeah. Love to find some of the stories, though.
Yeah.
No, vabbè.
Next week we are going to talk about that. So next week we're actually going to reveal the slate of Courageous Critters.
Quella a destra è fuori testa, quella a sinistra è orribile, è un meme gigante, è brutta, è gonfia.
But first, Nissa who shakes the world.
No, quella a destra è bellissima, fuori testa,
frog.
bellissima.
And then we have Liliana of the Dark Realms as a squirrel, a dark, evil-looking squirrel.
That's really cool. I love the color scheme on these.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so there are, again, there are two types of the Courageous Critters. They're the ones that are found in the Commander There are ones that are found in the collector boosters, and then there are 4 that are found in the commander decks. Each commander deck gets 1.
That's right, yeah, 4 exclusives to the commander decks.
Yep, and we saw the Tamio in the
Meraviglioso.
video. We'll see the rest as we look at the commander decks. Finally, we saw these in the debut as well.
Ragazzi, sono quelle del Commander, non c'è niente.
One of the more delightful things you can open in packs, which are the seasonal basics.
Ah, il mio binder esplode con questo.
Basics here.
So these are super sweet, sort of borderless, full art basic lands that are available in both foil and non-foil, in both the collector boosters and play boosters. And what's really cool about these is each of the basic lands has 4 different seasons that it's available in. So you can collect all of those or choose your favorite one. And it's worth noting that the different seasons appear at different frequencies. So I don't have the exact numbers on that, but I believe spring and summer are a little bit more common than, for example, the winter ones.
Yeah, which makes sense because that's their seasons of plenty. It makes sense. It's also in the collecting article where you can see the exact breakdown of how often you'll find spring, summer, autumn, and the chilly winter ones. All right, and then finally, before we get to, we have a little bit of time for questions. So we've got a couple more preview cards.
A volte le fanno vedere,
esatto. Some Q&A. And so let's look at just a couple adorable little preview cards. So this is a reprint, but that art, the flavor.
Questa era il Drain.
Runaway Together is always a really cute card whenever we reprint it, and this is no exception.
Era il Drain, vero?
Nobody bothered
Sì.
for Lebo and Pola because
Molto buona con le frog. Molto buona con le frogs. Vedi? Vedi?
Right.
Quanto cazzo è forte quella comune?
Script, but again, this is just art I like, I guess, is the category we're in. Ruthless Negotiation. Now, Ian, I will call out that we haven't seen a ton of flashback in this set, and this card has flashback all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's because there isn't a ton of flashback in this set. There's actually just 1 black uncommon and 1 blue uncommon, I believe, unless I'm forgetting maybe a rare or 2. But it was just a little light addition there. We've sort of decided that flashback is something that is sort of deciduous, that it can appear, from time to time in sets without being a major mechanic.
Caso non si può fare con l'Urrus.
A couple flashback cards here, given the graveyard themes.
Però si può fare con un sacco di altre roba, senza l'uso di flashback. Flashback 5 è troppo.
Yeah. And again,
Oggettivamente proprio giocarla dal cimitero fine si può fare.
And then finally, Repel
Arcanist,
art we used really early on, and we figured we might as well show what the card actually does. So we've seen in a lot of variations of this destroy target big creature sort of thing. So how did we land it? Repel Calamity.
Sort of the next in line of a variant here. We just want to make sure that there was a little bit more removal available, especially for the large Calamity.
Allora, se esiliava...
We're moving into the new play booster world where, there's more,
è meglio Get Lost.
Rares appearing in the draft.
In Limited, sì. In Limited fa.
Availability of answers.
Makes sense. And also fantastic art. And I honestly swear to you, did not put together Repel Calamity and the fact that this kills Calamity Beast.
È che solo Destroy Evil è
until just this moment.
A doppio effetto rispetto a questo.
Naming team. Finally, we do have the set symbols here, just to put them out there because this shows you what. So we got Bloomborough, the main set. We've got the commander in the middle and special guests. That is the same special guest.
Gli special guest quando si sanno, a parte Sword of Ice and Fire.
All right, we do have time for some questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in chat. It helps for me if you tag @Magic, and we will ask Ian and Oliver about these. So let's start with tell me there is a bat Sorin. You can't actually tell them
yet,
that.
But we may find out.
Non c'è un Sorin.
Let's see. All right. First, just the art is amazing, and then will there be support for 3 colors in Limited, since you probably want to mix and match at least 2 creature types?
So we definitely made sure there's ample mana fixing in Limited, and certainly throughout playtesting, people did definitely splash or play 3 colors. For example, I mentioned earlier that like rats and squirrels play well together. If you want to build a Sultai deck, these aren't the primary strategies. I wouldn't imagine that you've got 4 people at a draft table doing 3+ colors or anything like that. But if you want to, you certainly can, and we definitely put the tools in the set to be able to do that.
All right. Will all 14 cards and play boosters be from the Bloomborough main set and standard playable?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I'd have to double check on that. Like, let me not commit to an answer on that. Yeah, we might have some more information for you.
I believe you can get some non-one. Yeah, but let's not commit to that right now.
Yeah.
All right. With the paw prints, so the seasons, do you get the paws to spend just from casting the modal spell, or it is a separate resource you can get in different ways?
Yeah, we touched on that earlier.
Oliver ha detto voglio andare a casa e mi viene a
Spells
piangere.
are totally self-contained, so every time you cast a spell, you get sort of
Questo è
5
fortissimo.
points
È proprio
worth to
forte.
spend on the modes. There's no external way of getting additional points, before you cast the spell, and you can't carry any over to the next spell. It's just totally self-contained.
All right. Can I break a promise when I gift? I'm not really a gift-giving kind of person.
It's a good question, good question. So the way gift works, and again, we'll have a whole rules FAQ and stuff like that, but basically, as you cast the spell, you're making the decision of whether to promise the gift to your opponent or not.
Yep.
And then when the spell resolves, they receive the gift as the spell
Esatto, quindi
resolves.
allora, la meccanica
So
gift non è un'inculata e ti dici vabbè io ti gifto, sì grande, counter, gli hai dato un pezzo gratis. E gifti solo se risolve.
All right.
Decidi se giftare, ma gifti solo se
This is the
risolve.
most important question.
Grossa
Blake,
differenza.
What would you be if you went to Bloomborough? And we'll all answer this. I have my answer ready because our team actually talked about this yesterday. I would be either an otter or a rat, probably depending on my mood. I leaned otter, but I have to be realistic, and sometimes I'd probably be a rat. Ian.
Good question. I think I'd probably be a bird of some sort. Because I like helping other people out and being generally useful to the communities around me. Probably an owl, maybe, just because sometimes I kind of like to stay.
Little curveball.
Cazzi, ha fatto ridere Oliver però, ha fatto ridere Oliver, attenzione. Meno male, stavo preoccupando, perché magari stava male,
I'd
poverino.
definitely be an otter. I just like casting spells and frolicking in the river. Sounds like a good lifestyle.
It does, it really does.
No, te devi dichiarare il gift quando casti. Tu casti la spell
Right.
e dici
Was
è
there
giftata.
any intentionality to create cards with text boxes
Poi
with
Oppo
fewer
decide
words
se
or
risolvere o
simpler
meno.
mechanics? You talked a little bit about that with enter.
Ma
Yeah, it's
se io
always something that
gifto
we're
e
thinking
te
about, and then
counteri,
there's always
non
a
ti arriva il
careful
gift.
balance between making cards that are, simpler and more accessible and have fewer words on them versus making things that are exciting and are gonna, wow fans of Magic that have been playing for 5, 8, 10 years, right? So it's always a little bit of a push and pull there, and it's always sort of a value calculation of like, are these extra words worth it versus can we trim some words and still get 95% of the functionality that we want out of this card?
All right. Is the dragon bird from a different plane than Bloomborough? It seems odd. We don't have any other dragons.
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily spoil anything. I think
C'è
there might be too much
Dragon
more
effettivamente,
information, but,
Dragon
it's a
mi sembra
great question,
strano.
and you're definitely catching on to the right things.
Dragon, sei il capo degli
I will
uccelli.
call out to all of the Bloomborough story is out. It's 5 episodes. The last episode came out yesterday. So
è
you
già
can read
finita?
it all
È finita la
again
storia?
on WMTG.com. If you haven't read it yet, there's also an audio version of all 5 stories, all out already. So if you're more
Di loro
the podcasting type,
si umma.
you can listen to the Bloomborough story being read. So if you haven't checked out the story, from what I've seen, it's been really well received. So there are 5 episodes to either read or listen to right now. Let's see. Are we getting more sable and or ferret creatures in Bloomborough? We did see that there are some kind of one-ofs here and there for some different creature types. So sable or ferret?
I don't want to speak to either of those specifically, just because I don't recall exactly where a bunch of the sort of one-off creatures landed with their final creature types and art treatments and things like that. But there are, like you said, lots of one-off creatures. We called them cameo creatures throughout set design, of just making sure that in addition to the 10 majorly supported creature types, that we had a variety of other animals for folks who are fans of those, and just to kind of convey the variety of the plane in general.
Cool. I saw a question about when we're going to show off the special guest cards. That's going to be next week's show. We're going to talk about special guest cards, and we're going to talk about courageous critters, basically things that have some really cool art treatments.
Dai,
We're going to talk about. We're going to have some art folk on the show next week. Let's see.
Oh,
Whoa, jumped on me here.
non ho capito.
Let's see.
Non le fanno vedere ora le special guest.
Is the list back with Bloomborough? So that's no. It's special guests. So yes and no.
Yeah, and that goes back to the earlier question of like, are all of the cards in the play boosters from the main set? And I believe you're right that we do have the special guests.
The special guests can show up, and they are the ones that are a little bit different. Yep. Will we get a board wipe? You can say yes or no.
Yeah, in fact, I think we saw a variant of one earlier, right, in the Black
Season of Lost.
Vabbè, scusami, esiste un'espansione che non ha almeno una vratta?
Does Offspring always cost 2?
No, it's not necessarily always 2. The ones we saw were, but there are a variety of costs for Offspring.
Yep. Is Offspring multi-kicker? So this is
ETB è solo Enters, sì.
Once, twice.
You can only pay it once.
Ok, Offspring non è cumulabile, quello me lo immaginavo, però effettivamente hanno fatto bene a dirlo.
Are there going to be a lot of food-making spells?
Yeah, there's definitely a good amount of food in the set. It's both a great flavor fit in terms of the pastoral.
Beh, per forza, che domanda del cazzo è? Se no come fanno a fare la meccanica limited, scusa? Per forza ci sia food.
Other things to do with
Giorgio, che c'è? Cosa piangi, Giorgio?
Tend to inflate life totals and
Piange.
make games go longer. So you'll see lots of things to do with food in addition to the food itself.
Okay. Oliver, I think this is a good question for you. How do you balance the power of the set with the fact that most of the creatures are small?
Yeah.
Oh.
For limited,
Non era pronto.
Tend to be on the bigger side. So
Cazzo, devo parlare, non ero pronto.
And then for constructed, it's actually kind of nice because cheaper cards tend to be stronger in constructed. So it's easy to make a lot of like the rares and exciting legendary cards in the set on the cheaper side to give them a better shot in constructed.
All right. Did you ever consider heroic instead of valiant?
We didn't specifically consider heroic. The Vision Design team did hand off Valiant more or less where it is right now. We did try a couple different variants of Valiant in terms of like, being able to trigger multiple times per turn or what things did and didn't trigger it before settling on the final version. Heroic specifically, I will say, having worked on sets like Theros in the past, requires a lot of set infrastructure around it. And here, we knew we wanted Valiant to just be a mouse mechanic, which is really like a 1/10 slice of the set, right? Because it's just one of the 10 color pairs.
Nerfata eroiche perché sotto pini.
Easier to do and sort of a tighter floor and ceiling between the not triggering it and triggering it as compared to heroic. So that's kind of where we landed on Valiant as a heroic variant.
Cool. I did see a question about whether you can open commander cards in play boosters, asking for draft. I believe the answer for this set is no. Looking at the breakdown, and again, after the show, you can head to dailymtg.com and the full collecting article will be up. But just looking at the breakdown of play boosters, it says that each play booster will contain 6 to 7 commons. Some of those play boosters will contain a card from the list, which is what we're talking about instead of a common. And then the list says cards found on the list in Bloomborough are special guest cards. So that's the only slot where you can get sort of non-main set cards out of, actually, I say that, and there's a wild card slot. Read the article. It's, I don't want to speak 100% to that because there might be. Yeah, we'll get that answer afterwards. Let's see. With the magic cards, so I think this is referring to the tokens having converted mana cost. Does this mean other cards like Roxanne's Meteorite token now has a 5 mana value? So this isn't a rule change, right? This is just how the Offspring mechanic works?
Yeah. In order to make Offspring as simple as possible, just being able to say, hey, it's a copy of the creature except it's 1/1 is the simplest way we can convey that. But in doing so, the rules then say that it's also inheriting the mana cost. So we want to make sure that that mana cost was reflected on the token.
Vabbè, questa è proprio una domanda da babbo.
Trick you into thinking the token was its own individual.
È una copia, ma 1/1.
Individual magic card that you could put in your deck. So that's why it says down in the text box of the token, sort of in reminder text, that it has the mana cost.
Non è un token diverso, è una copia 1/1. Hanno fatto il token per...
Head to the Arena blog after this. There will be
an Conjure, Dio boia, esatto, bravo.
That will cover at least some of these questions. I'm trying to get through this quickly because we are almost out of time. I am seeing questions about whether Phyrexians missed Bloomborough during the invasion. I don't think you guys know. That's not your area of
Grazie Trunix per il Prime. Bella la topa, mettere la lontra.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. So here is going to be our final question, because I know you can answer this one. How many Calamity Beasts are there? And then what sort of color identities do we get for the Calamity Beasts?
Ooh, that's tough. You're really testing my memory.
I am. How many I think you can do?
So how many total Calamity Beasts are there? I want to say there's around 10 total.
Okay.
Yeah, between like 8 and 10-ish,
Okay.
plus minus a couple. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Color identities.
Color identities. So we do have a cycle of mythic monocolor Calamity Beasts, and then there's sort of just a smattering of them in different color combinations at rare.
Okay.
Including the one multicolor one that we saw earlier. Yeah.
The one that turns
so
everything into
they're
food,
not
yeah.
hard cycled in a way, which is part of why it's a little bit tough to tell you exactly how many are in the set off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But it's basically the cycle of 5 mythics plus a smattering of rare ones.
All right. Yeah. Great. Well, that is all the time we have. That's our hour. But Bloomborough is going to march on. Previews are going to continue throughout the internet. Today, tomorrow, into next week, we are going to be back on Weekly MTG next week. And again, we're going to be talking art. We are specifically going to be looking at special guest cards and the Courageous Critters to talk about concepting those and doing a lot of fun stuff with that art. So head to dailymtg.com after this for all of the details on all of the things, including a list of where to find previews on what days and what websites or social media accounts or wherever it may be.
Wherever it may be.
Thank you, Oliver, and we will see you next week.
Oh, allora, l'ultima? Niente. E niente, ora si va qui. Allora, capire un po'. Devo rivedere quella blu. L'unica che non mi ricordo è quella blu. Questa. Pesca una carta, scegli un artefatto, cattura e controlli, crea un token. Rimetti ogni non land non token permanent to its owner's hand. Non è male, ma costa 6 e tanto. Ralla è forte. Questa è rotta, ci può fare delle combo. Cioè, veramente, turno 4. Aspetta. Cioè, se te fai turno 4 Night of Soul Betrayal in Historic o in Timeless, comunque Night of Soul Betrayal into Gufo, te hai loccato per sempre le creature dell'avversario finché non ti spaccano lui. L'avversario non può più giocare niente. Fine. Non è per niente male. Kervek però è una creatura, è più facile da togliere. Night of Soul Betrayal no. E altre carte secondo me sono interessantissime, sono l'Adepto, come ho già detto. La Otter, ovviamente. L'Adepto, l'Arciere, questo è forte, non si può dire niente. La carta è forte. L'albero è un casino, ragazzi. L'albero è dico umani e attingo 6. Cioè, il problema è che non dà colore per la cosa che hai scelto, però è Nyctos per le creature. No, non è un'espansione al power level basso, come mi aspettavo. Dicevo, vabbè, farà una classica espansione standard, come OTJ. OTJ ha avuto un power level piuttosto basso, in realtà. Questo è il cazzo. Questo è già più... Il power level è già più alto di OTJ. Terra per elfi questa, sì. Che dire? follettini e follettine, ma che dico follettine e follettine? Che dire ratti, topi, rane, lucertole, Io son gasato. Non lo ero. Cioè, io ero solo in hype per le artwork, oggettivamente, per il flavor del set. Ora inizio a essere gasato per le carte. Cioè,